Hey, what's up everybody? It's Joe from Gadgetry Tech, and I wanted to make a video to discuss the new Sony XM6, which is their latest active noise cancellation wireless headphone, but I didn't want to pretend that a lot of other good headphones didn't exist, both above and below this price range, because this is debuting at a retail price of $450. This was also not sent to me for review by Sony. This isn't sponsored by any brand. In fact, just to be clear, I purchased the Sony XM6, I purchased the AirPod Max. Headphones.com sent me the Bathys, so FoKus did not send this to me for review. The marketing team behind Noble, at least this particular headphone, was for an earlier review several months ago, but it's worth including for something like this because it's actually a more expensive headphone, again with noise cancellation, and it has some unique features, so I wanted to discuss that. I purchased the Sennheiser Momentum 4 just for this review. I purchased the Bose QuietComfort Ultra for this review, and I also purchased the Bowers & Wilkins PX8 for this review. So not the best decision financially, but I really hope this video serves as a general, good highlight about how all of these compare in different key areas. Now, in the interest of saving you time, I have chapters in the description below, and I also will be using some visualizations here because there are a lot of specs and features to consider, but I didn't want to just talk about that. That's a huge burner of time. If you're new to my channel, huge thanks for stopping by, and if you're familiar with me, you know I can get quite in the weeds. So let's start with some basic specs, including price. Now, Sony's kind of in the middle of the road here, and Sennheiser kind of rounds up the bottom, being the least expensive one currently on the market, and it kind of trades blows between the PX8 from Bowers & Wilkins, and then you have the Noble Apollo, the FoKus Apollo, and the FoKus Bathys all being at the higher end. Battery life is really similar with these models, but there is an edge to the FoKus Apollo and the Sennheiser Momentum 4 in case you're chasing maximum endurance. Codec support is obviously really important, but I will preface this that aside from like a low quality SBC connection, most of the other codecs have a pretty good sound quality performance, and a lot of people realistically won't hear a huge difference. If you're an Apple user, you're going to be using AAC. And if you have the ability to run lossless and use something like LDAC, LDAC is available on the Sony XM6 as well as the FoKus Apollo. Now, just in case you're seeking more than a wireless connection, you can also consider wired, and there's two ways you can do that. Some of these will support USB DAC mode, which uses a USB-C connection to your device and can often sound better because it's a lossless signal. You also have the ability to run analog, and there's different forms of this, so I just want to keep this in mind. If you see analog passive, that means the headphone will work without power. That also bypasses the onboard signal processing, or DSP, which means that it will sound different. The Sony is a prime example of this. You can use this with an analog connection both on and off. If you use it off, I'm getting ahead of myself, but if you leave the phone off, the headphone off, and connect it with analog, it sounds pretty bad. So a lot of people will say that they want that as a fallback in case the battery dies one day. Just keep in mind, you're not going to get the same listening experience. So passive means off, active means on, and of course you have the mix of USB-C for some of these. The Sony does not have USB-C DAC support anymore. That's gone, so it's either wireless or analog. Lastly, on the note of multi-point connections, they all basically have it. The AirPod Max is kind of like multi-point for iOS and Mac OS, not so much for the other devices. And the Sennheiser Momentum 4 has multi-point, but I can tell you it was the only one that didn't really work well for me for mixed devices. I often had to disconnect one of the Bluetooth connections for it to properly hop from one device to the next. The other headphones were all very seamless and switched over between multiple devices, no problem. Now we're going to get into comfort and build quality first, but I wanted to touch on a couple important specs. One is the weight, of course, but weight isn't everything because how hard it squeezes your head, the quality of the pads, the depth and dimensions of the pads, all of this will affect comfort. So weight's only a tiny piece of that. Now, I also measured all of the pad dimensions, and these numbers represent the interior dimensions of the pad, not the exterior. And for some particular headphones, they have an angled baffle because the speakers kind of sit like this. And because of that, you'll get two different depth measurements. The more shallow and smaller depth number, or lower number, represents the depth at the front of the pad because that's usually not necessary to have as much space, and then the larger number represents the depth in the rear. You will notice that Sony has the shallowest depth here, and that is noticeable. The Sony in particular has an active noise cancellation bump that protrudes out, so depending on your ear shape, this is going to be an issue for some people. If you have larger ears, if you've run into that issue before where ANC bumps can kind of touch your ear, the Sony is going to be the worst offender of all of these here. Leading more into comfort, I want to talk about clamp force, which is how hard the headphone squeezes your head. And I can tell you that it varies for a few reasons. One, your head shape might have different pressure points, so it will affect how the clamp force feels versus up here versus down here. It's not just your head shape, the geometry of the headphones can vary as well for how they put pressure on your head. So I did 3D print a rig to accurately measure the scale, or at least how much squeezing pressure a headphone has. This will eventually be open sourced. It will be released. Not only will my database be released, but we're going to release the 3D print files. I'm working with Capra Audio. Huge thanks to them for their help. And that will help maybe put this tool in the hands of multiple reviewers down the road. My goal is transparent data, not just my opinion, because it's one thing for me to say this one feels stronger than the other, but these numbers help represent the actual clamp force on one particular head size. Keep in mind, clamp force can change by how far you telescope these yokes. So think about it as leverage, and if you extend it, the clamp force technically gets weaker, but obviously it's going to put the headphone, the ear cups in different spots. So you have to size it accordingly. So to save time with the video, while I continue discussing comfort on a particular headphone level, I'm also going to show you the design of the chassis, materials, etc. And let's start with the Sony. For one, it's available in several colors. You have this telescoping yoke here, which is nice. These swivel mostly forward, not all the way, but all the way back, which means if you're laying it on your chest, it's going to go like this. Now, this has a stronger clamp, and ergonomically, this squeezes your neck. It's like a borderline strangulation type feel. Not crazy strong, but it's not comfortable, so I don't think this is a good headphone for wearing around your neck. The materials are questionable to me. This is a very cheap vinyl, or like a leatherette material. I don't know how well this is going to hold up, but depending on your climate, I think this is going to break down over time. This whole piece up here is made in that same material, and the padding is super thin. You can see if I squeeze it, it's hitting a metal band right underneath. Now, this is a light headphone, so you don't need a lot of padding. This isn't like super uncomfortable, where when you put this on, you feel a metal bar is on your head. It's just not the most comfortable one here, and I think they could have made the padding a little bit better. It helps that they made it wider, because the pressure is distributed more evenly, and then you have the same material on the pads, which is a very thin-ish rubber, and it helps like with noise isolation because ANC was a big focus here, but they're not really deep, and over time, especially as they compress a little bit, you do feel that ANC bump a little. The padding is crazy thin on the XM6. You can see there's like nothing there, which is kind of odd. I think they did this to improve the ANC performance by getting the microphone as close to on your ear as possible, because that helps with accuracy for getting rid of noise. So that's a byproduct of that, but it's kind of at the sacrifice of some comfort a little bit. As far as controls go, you have an ANC mic, which is going to change between active noise cancellation, transparency mode, and off. Then your power button, which obviously serves as pairing and power cycling the headphone. There's your 3.5 analog and your USB on the side for charging. Now, this uses gesture control, so that's what this disc is for. It's kind of touchy, but it's not bad. The volume steps are kind of small. I wish you could do larger steps like you can with Sennheiser to more quickly increase or decrease volume. So you kind of sit there often doing this if you're really trying to change the volume quite a bit. Not a huge fan of that, but then the rest you can see the microphone array on both sides because it has multiple mics. Now, I'll be honest, for $450, there are things I like. This does have a folding hinge now, which the older XM5s did not have, and this part inside is metal. So in terms of durability, I feel like they did improve the hinges. I think the XM5s were a huge miss in terms of long-term durability, and some people, numerous people, it's almost like a ticking time bomb that the hinge is going to eventually snap if you use this heavy. I'm not a huge fan of the finish choice because it's almost like a rubberized plastic, and as a result, it feels great in hand. Like the shape of it and everything feels nice, but it will show scratches and wear super easy. If you have any kind of an oil on your skin, it's going to look oily very quickly. So there's nothing hiding any imperfections on this particular headphone. Not my favorite choice, but you know, I just wanted to point that out. It's more up to you than me. And then you get into the Apple AirPods Max, which uses a gratuitous amount of metal. This whole thing is aluminum and it feels super premium. Again, typical Apple. You have a suspension like mesh fabric here, which does break down over time. I think this will eventually stretch out. So how it comes out of the box and how it's been working for me for the past few months, it's been holding up fine. My wife uses this one more than I do, so she's at least been breaking it in for me. But the sizing on it is great. It feels really durable. I don't really see reports of this snapping or breaking like some other models out there. So I feel like the build quality is nice, and they use a magnetic attached ear cup, which is great. All the others are typically just press fit, and you have like these little snaps. So it feels really solid. Now, there are some weird things with the AirPod Max. One is there's no power button. And it's annoying because anytime I'm in range, even though I'm not wearing it, if it's just sitting on my desk or the table gets bumped, these things like to just turn on. There's no way to turn them off, and the phantom power drain is pretty poor. I don't know if that's just my use case or how I've been using it, or if others want to chime in the comments, great. I wish they gave me a power button. I should be able to choose when this is on or off, and I've had it where my phone says it's connected to it when I'm not even trying to use it. So it's kind of annoying there, but the other controls I do like. I love having a volume wheel. It's so easy. The other advantage to this is if you're wearing gloves, it's super easy to increase and decrease the volume. And then this gives you a mix of ANC controls and obviously play, pause, activate Siri, things like that. This is more intended to be used on Apple devices, although it does have the SBC codec. So overall, it feels nice, but all of the weight, this is the heaviest one here, and most of the weight is in the ear cup. So the clamp force and comfort just feels different, especially when you first size it. I have way more pressure up here. This is one of the less comfortable headphones for me to wear. The clamp force is quite extreme, and when you add that to the weight and the way it pushes pressure, I can actually wear this one the least over a long period of time over all the other models here. And you have the FoKus Bathys, which is the one I've used the most. I've had this for probably 8 months to a year now. I just loved the Dune edition, so I'm a little biased, but you have a real leather outer up here with a nice suede liner. This is all metal, so it's going to feel really durable. You have a telescoping yoke, and then, of course, the removable pads. These are quite deep. The clamp force is basically the same as Apple, and when you factor in the weight being comparable, these are the strongest, clampiest, heaviest headphones here, but this feels noticeably different. I can wear this for a much longer period of time, partly because of the geometry of the headphone. I talked about that briefly, but putting the hinge mechanism down here, as opposed to up here, has a big difference on how it puts pressure on your head. So as a result, the FoKus design just works better for me, and I find it very comfortable. The padding is also more adequate compared to the Sony. You can see there's a lot more give here, and there are no touch controls. You have an ANC button on the left, a slider switch for your power and DAC mode, because this works as a USB-C DAC, which does work on Apple in DAC mode, so that's kind of nice if you want lossless there. Then again, physical buttons for your action and volume increase and decrease. Again, working well if you have gloves. So this other thing to point out is this lights up when you turn it on. You see the glow. I have mine set to dim, but there's also a bright mode if you want it to glow a little bit stronger. This design is different. Obviously, you have to kind of like or dislike this. So that's more up to you. I can tell you my only gripe with this headphone, and this wears around my neck much better than both of these two. So if you take it off, you know, if you're eating, let's say you're at an airport and sometimes you do this, this is a little bit easier to do that. I have a beard. You can see my facial hair. These little things every now and then would catch my beard hair. Not the most pleasant feeling. It's the only one that's done that of all these designs. I'll just suck it up because I've liked this headphone a lot anyway, but I just wanted to point that out. Just like Apple, there's no collapsible hinge here. It just basically rotates, and you can see a little bit of a kick out and then all the way the other way. So let's move in to the Noble FoKus Apollo, which is a heavier headphone. It's not crazy heavy, which is surprising because even though this looks like it could be a plastic cap, this is all metal too. This is all metal. So the build quality is very premium. Everything that moves or actually handles the stress and daily abuse is metal here. You can see the cups are physically the deepest here. So this isn't going to stow away or feel as portable as some of the other models. I still find this very, very comfortable. I like the choice of a more breathable, like velour fabric up here. It's actually more like Alcantara. I can wear this for a very long time. Comfort's never been an issue for me, and the deep cups mean that my ears are kind of like free to breathe inside. The clamp force isn't bad either. It's a good balance, and because this hinge design is where it is, I feel like the pressure is quite even. You have a switch here for the microphone mute, which is kind of cool to have a physical button to disable the mic, because this also doubles as a gaming headset. Looking at the bottom of the headphone, you have an analog input on both sides, and that's because one of them is for the included boom mic. Now, this works on Bluetooth, this works on 3.5mm, and it works in the USB-C DAC mode. I can tell you that the DAC mode has a little bit of a buzz, more noticeable on the mic pickup. So if you're planning on gaming and you want to use it as a USB-C headset, your friends are going to hear a little bit of a static hissing sound, at least on my unit. That hasn't been addressed with firmware, so I actually think it's a shielding issue or something with the chip. So this is a cool feature, but it's not always going to be utilized because it's a little bit quirky in that regard. Otherwise, I do like the controls. You have an ANC button, which toggles between all three modes. You can disable ANC entirely or even go to transparency mode. Physical controls for your action and volume again, and I already mentioned the 3.5mm input. Now this uses a high quality protein leather. It's not real leather, and just like FoKus is using a real leather on the outer headband, but they're using a protein leather on the inside. Only one headphone here uses real leather, and that's the last one, the Bowers PX8, so I'll get into that momentarily. Moving on to Sennheiser though, this is the Momentum 4, which is a very unique headphone design in my opinion, because frankly, I'm going to be a little bit harsh on the design for just a couple of reasons. I like this textile fabric on top. I think it looks really clean. This is all plastic, but you know, having a dual hinge like this, it should hold up pretty well, and you get really good articulation because it can rotate back and all the way forward. So you can wear it around your neck how you want. This is one of the more comfortable ones to wear around my neck. If anything, a little bit more comfortable than the Bathys, which has been my favorite discussed so far. So I like the comfort. The only thing I'm not a fan of is this just seems like an unfinished design. This has that same rubber material that's found on the Sony XM6 that I'm not crazy about. So it's not super breathable, and I don't know how well it'll hold up, but there is more padding here. You can see it deforms a little, just like what Sony's doing with the pads. My issue with this design is these cups look almost unfinished. And because you have these little holes right here, and which are intentional, it's part of the acoustic design of this particular model. But this just looks like the plate fell off because there's no branding or anything on the cups, which you don't need it because you have the Sennheiser logo here, but it just looks like a more generic, plain looking headphone. And with the high use of plastics, not a huge fan of the looks, but you know, looks aren't everything because this is the least expensive one here, and it does deliver on the sound quality department, so I'll get into that. Comfort is fantastic on this. It's a very light headphone. The clamp force is rather moderate, and I can wear this for a very long period of time. It's easily up there with one of the most comfortable ones here. Decent amount of pad depth. The pad material feels nice. You can see I have more cushion available to me than the Sony. And as a result, these are a little bit better for glasses, as are the FoKus. So if you wear glasses, real quick, little segue, the Noble FoKus Apollo, Focal Bathys, this guy, the Bowers Wilkins PX8, and the Bose are better for glasses. I wasn't as crazy about the Sony XM6 or the AirPod Max for glasses because the way the pressure was and the lack of give on the Sony headset. Otherwise, the controls on this guy is pretty nice. You have the power button that you can press and hold, and I like having the status lights. You can see the USB-C and then a 2.5mm analog input, so it comes with the adapter. This too uses gesture control just like Sony. This is much more sensitive, so sometimes you'll get accidental gesture changes. You can disable that in the app, but one thing I do like about the Momentum 4's implementation is if I slide this up a little up and down, I only change the volume a little bit, where if I do much larger swipes, I can increase the volume much more quickly, which can be really nice. It's very convenient if you have a quick change you want to make. You're not sitting there fumbling around. No foldable hinges here either, just basically rotation, so that's going to affect how it stows away in the case, but I just want to point that out. So let's move on to the Bose QuietComfort Ultra, which is a very basic, clean design, very understated, very mature looking. And it looks a little bit cheaper for the price, I'll admit, but that's just a personal thing. It's not that it's bad. This is made with premium materials. This is all metal. The entire yoke and the headband here is metal, and as a result, everything feels really, really solid. You can even see the metal on the inside hinge. So I feel like this is going to last a very long period of time. This is a lightweight, light clamp headphone with really good pad dimensions. It's angled to support the ANC being close to your ear, but I have plenty of clearance, and as a result, this is the most comfortable headphone of all of these I've worn because that weight and lighter clamp helps a lot, and it doesn't feel too unstable. Like this is a lighter clamp than the AirPod Max, for example, but because it's so light, if I'm moving around, it actually still stays rather secure to my head, whereas the Apple squeezes my head, but it still kind of flops around. So that's how much of an impact weight can have for everyday use. And then the only thing with this guy is it's different in terms of rotation. The cups only rotate outward, and you have a little bit of a kickback in for articulation. Obviously, you get the collapsing yokes, which is nice for stowing. But when you wear this around your head, the cups go up. This is still very comfortable to wear. It's just the hard plastics are going to rest on your chest, but it doesn't really squeeze too hard. So to me, it was still comfortable. As far as the controls go, I love what Bose did here. You have a couple physical buttons for your power, pairing, and action, and then you have a slider right here for your volume. It's a little bit less inconsistent than the Sennheiser and Sony because it's a dedicated spot. It's just more tactile, and you still feel like you have really good control over it. USB-C input on the left, and then another 2.5 input, just like the Sennheiser Momentum 4. You can see a huge difference in padding, and again, just to put this in perspective, the QuietComfort Ultra has a ton of give here. This is just awesome, and then when you look at the Sony again, very little to give. And then we get into the Bowers & Wilkins PX8, one of the most expensive ones here, but at least you feel like you're getting one of the most expensive ones because the build quality and material choices are absolutely fantastic. It's not just metal. Look at the finish of that. It just has amazing depth to it. And I'm not knocking Bose because it's less expensive. This too is metal, but you can see a big difference in terms of how premium it looks. Some people don't care for this, and that's fine, but it is a little bit of attention to detail here. You have a huge branding thing. You have Bowers & Wilkins printed very boldly on the cup, so they're not hiding that. The big thing that I love about the PX8 is this is real Napa leather. It feels amazing, and the reason why I like this is because artificial leathers are a little bit less breathable. Even though they can create an excellent seal, it will build up a little bit of heat. And one of the biggest advantages in particular to the PX8, it's not just the initial comfort, the long-term comfort is excellent because that Napa leather really helps kind of relieve some of that heat buildup that the other headphones have. So as far as rotation, you can see it rotates all the way this way and this way, so you can wear it around your neck how you want. A little bit more clampy than the Bose, for example, so I feel a little bit more pressure on my neck, but if you rotate it upward, it helps kind of lighten the load a little bit. So I can wear this for a long time. You can see there's adequate padding here. It's not as plush as the Bose, for example, or even the FoKus, but the headband itself is very wide, so it distributes the pressure really, really nice. I like the way this is designed. I think the controls are great. I personally prefer physical controls over touch because it's tactile and it's consistent. So you have one button on the left-hand side. This is going to be your active noise cancellation button. And then you have your action button in the center here, volume up and down, and then your Bluetooth, which is kind of cool because when you slide it up, that is how you put it in pairing mode. And when you connect this to the Bowers & Wilkins app to link it to your app, one thing that's kind of cool is it has you swipe up on this to accept the Bluetooth pairing request a second time. So from a security standpoint, that's kind of cool. The only thing I was let down with this guy physically is I have a little blemish here because this is actually like a leatherette liner. It feels artificial leather, not as good as this Napa here, but I had a little bit of a mark, so that's kind of like a quality control issue. I recently just bought this and it came that way, and yes, it was factory sealed. Other than that, I'm really happy with the design and comfort of the PX8. So the Sony case is relatively compact thanks to the collapsible ear cups, and then instead of a zipper, it has this little clasp, which I didn't know how well that would work, but honestly, it works really well, and even with some drops and occasional mishandlings, it seems to be very secure. The Bose case is the most compact one here. It's similar in terms of height, but it's a little bit more narrow, and you can see that it's just slightly more shallow as well. The next three cases are relatively similar in size, with Bowers & Wilkins maybe being a touch larger just because it doesn't taper in as much, but it's still rather thin, and when you compare it to FoKus, similar thickness down here, but it tapers inward towards the top. And then with the Sennheiser case, it tapers in like this, but on the depth, it's maintaining a slightly thicker thickness overall compared to both FoKus and Bowers & Wilkins. Then you have the Noble FoKus Apollo case, which is obviously the largest one here. The headphone's the largest, but the case design doesn't really do itself any favors because not only is it physically wider and taller, it is significantly thicker, and this is going to take up the most space in your bag. It does come with a handle, which is cool, so maybe it's designed to kind of be carried on the side, but just keep in mind that's going to take up a little bit more bag space. Then you have the most compact quote-unquote case, and that is the Apple AirPods Max case, which is more like a diaper or bra. Protection is pretty bad because even if you drop it, it's still kind of exposed in a lot of areas. It's nice for traveling as long as you're not too rough with your things and you don't have a lot of other things in there, but don't expect it to give a lot of protection. So getting into noise isolation and active noise cancellation performance, originally I was going to show a bunch of charts and kind of show how my system measured it with background noise being played, like pink noise, for example. But I'm going to try to just compress this section. So just to be clear, the Sony does have effectively the best noise cancellation here in terms of the mid frequencies, but the Apple AirPod Max does a little bit better job of reducing some of the bass as well. So these two are neck and neck of still having the best active noise cancellation you can possibly have. Transparency mode on both of these are also class leading, so it just goes to show how well implemented those systems are. They sound very natural, with the Apple AirPod Max having just a slight hiss. So the noise floor is a little bit higher on the AirPod Max, especially in ANC mode where you're trying to go pure silent. The Sony does a fantastic job with ANC because not only is it blocking most of the outside noise, you don't even hear a hiss. It's kind of jarring because the app allows you to have like an active mode where if you're still for a long period of time, the ANC will turn on. But then when you start walking, it turns on an ambient mode, which is kind of a cool feature. And I was wearing these when I was outside grilling and I had my smoker on. And because I was at the smoker for a while, the ANC kicked on and I thought I lost power because then I heard nothing. It works that well. So excellent class-leading performance on ANC on both of these guys. Now here's what's crazy. So all of these have good ANC performance. The weakest ones here are, and it's not by much. This is so similar. So Bose is the runner-up to these two. Fantastic ANC performance. The only downside is there's noticeably more white noise hiss, and the total reduction isn't as strong of these two, but it's like 95, 98% there. The only thing I didn't like about the Bose is even if your room is dead silent, if ANC is on, you have a slight hiss sound, and that can drive you crazy if you're listening to something very quietly. And what makes it worse is Bose does not allow you to disable ANC, unlike these guys. So there's no way to get rid of that hiss. So it kind of has a particular use case here where these are really well suited for travel because of the comfort and versatility and all of that. But if you're using this predominantly in an office, just keep in mind you're probably going to hear that white noise more than you might like. Transparency mode is excellent on the Bose though, so if you are up and about and you want to hear people, things do sound quite natural. You just again have that slight background noise to deal with. I think all three of these are kind of in a similar league, and I'm leaving the Bowers out for a reason, so I'll touch on that in a moment. These all have good passive noise isolation, and they have okay active noise cancellation. The Sennheiser Momentum 4 seems to be the weakest overall performer for noise reduction, but it's not bad, and if you're actually listening to content, to me, I could live with this every day. I think we're at a point now where depending on how loud you need to hear it, then yeah, maybe you want a little bit extra ANC. But I thought this still did an okay job. It just let in a little bit more than some of the competitors, that's all. The active noise cancellation on the FoKus Bathys is okay. Passive noise isolation is decent. It has a good job of blocking sound with ANC off, but there is a slight hiss, and it doesn't reduce the noise as much as a good chunk of the competitors here. The Noble FoKus Apollo has comparable ANC performance to this guy. It's not bad. To me, I could live with it, and I have. I've been using the Bathys for a while. The only thing that's worth pointing out on the Bathys is when you put it in transparency mode, it's not quite as accurate tonally. Things sound a little bit thinner. There's a little bit of a hiss on it, but it just lacks bass. So if you want things to sound more natural, some of these other guys do a little bit better job. The Noble FoKus Apollo, when you put it in transparency mode, sounds decent and has a little bit more bass, but everything sounds kind of like it got turned down slightly, whereas some of these others maintain real life sound and in some cases boost the sound up just a little bit more. The one thing I noticed with the FoKus Apollo that was a small drawback is sometimes I heard like a buzzing or processing sound, like again, kind of like with the RF issues I was having with the USB-C DAC mode. And transparency mode, I can hear a little bit of an electronic sound. So to me, this is the weakest one and overall with transparency mode, followed by the FoKus, which I talked to FoKus about this months ago, and part of that was intentional because they didn't want the ANC to impede pure sound quality, which we'll get into momentarily. I think the transparency mode is good on the Sennheiser Momentum 4. It almost acts like a mild hearing aid because it boosts ambient sounds louder than most of the others here. So if you have this maxed out and you're trying to hear everything, even like the sound of your fabric, it really picks that up quite a bit. A little bit of a white noise hiss, but at least it's doing what it's designed to do. And then we get into the Bowers & Wilkins PX8, which I think had a lot of potential. Mine is defective, and it is really bad, like almost unusable, and I'm going to be returning this to exchange it because, frankly, it drives me crazy. I have an insanely loud, like staticky, buzzing chipset noise, RF issue noise on the left ear cup. It happens every time my noise cancellation is on, and when transparency mode is on. It's almost like there's like antennas that are losing reception and it's constantly swirling around. And if I press in on it, it goes away. And if I tilt my head like this, I think it's a seal issue, technically. It also kind of goes away. If I disable ANC entirely and just go off, then that noise is gone. And I'm not the only one that's had this issue. I've seen some posts on Reddit and other places where people have complained about the same problem. So it's kind of like a luck of the draw thing. I don't think they have the most consistent ANC performance out there. So it's kind of a gamble on if this is going to work or not. So if you still get one of these, if you like the other things I say about the PX8, 100% check the active noise cancellation. Move your hand around a little bit, make sure it's very consistent. When it's working, it's still in the middle of the pack. It's not as good as the Sony or the AirPod Max or the Bose. I'd say it's more in line with the rest of these guys here, but it's not bad. Have it not had that issue, I wouldn't have any real fault with the active noise cancellation performance. It's just because you have things like the Sony and the AirPods that are just a little bit better, so they look and stand out as better. But to me, I put these on, enable ANC, and as long as I'm holding the cup, it did a surprisingly good job. Now, normally I would spend a lot of time talking about sound quality, and I'm going to spend some time, but we're just not going to get as far into the weeds as I do in some of my in-depth reviews, because I want to keep this high level. The Sony has a better sound signature than the outgoing XM5, and it still sounds thick. It still has a lot of mid-bass. You can see a massive bass shelf. So I have a headphone measuring rig where I can measure the frequency response. If you're familiar with this type of thing, I use a Gross KB006X Pinaclone. You don't have to know what any of that is, but I do have a link in the description below if you want to shop and compare different measurements from one model to another. Having said that, I don't mind the tuning of the Sony. It's just really bass thick, but it measures to have more bass than what I actually hear, partly because my measurement rig is a flat plate with an ear simulator. My head is not a flat plate. I have this little groove right here for the shape of my skull. And as a result, I don't think it creates the same seal, and the bass is a little bit weaker than it measures. It still has a ton of bass, but the mid bass is what is most noticeable. So if you're doing EQ, I think cutting some of that mid bass down, like the 64, 125 hertz down a little bit on custom EQ can make a big difference. And on that note, Sony gave you a 10-band equalizer with this guy, which is fantastic. So having the ability to really customize your sound, and there are a lot of different profiles. You effectively have 3 different EQ profiles you can customize, in addition to the ones that Sony provides. The voicing on the Sony isn't bad. It's actually one of the better ones tuned here in the mid-range once you table off some of the bass. It has just a good, it's great for a mix of rock, EDM, hip-hop, jazz. It doesn't really matter as long as you table that bass just a little bit. Some people might want more bass, but you might find that this doesn't sound as clear. So I did make my own custom EQ. This is just to my personal preference. Everyone's going to have their own opinion. So I'm sharing my EQ with you now, but don't feel like this is the end game. Maybe just start here and see if you like it. And if you find that it's too mid-forward or lacks too much bass, then, play around with it and go from there. But once I did the EQ, I was pretty happy with it. The issue with the Sonys, it's not just frequency response. I don't think the drivers sound as clear or detailed as the majority of other headphones here. You're paying more for the active noise cancellation performance and some of the other feature sets, like the transparency mode working as well as it does. It has a cafe mode, which sounds like you have a Sony TV playing music 20 feet, 30 feet away. That's what that mode does, so it's kind of cool for relaxing, but I'd rather just turn the volume down. Now, I did mention that Sony uses analog as well. The analog mode, when the headphone is turned on, measures identically to the Bluetooth mode, so you're not gaining or losing anything in terms of frequency response. You just get higher bandwidth depending on what device you are normally connecting it to with Bluetooth. If you're using LDAC, then you won't hear a difference with the analog connection. If the headphone is turned off and you're in passive mode, it sounds terrible. It is like mid-bass forward and then nothing in the mid-range and low treble. So it sounds very cluttered and veiled, like you have a cloth between the headphone and your ear. It doesn't sound great, but at least it's there as a backup. Then you have the AirPod Max, which, man, it surprised me because I always thought it wasn't going to sound as good as it did. This is one of the best performers here. It sounds fantastic. Which thank God, because in typical Apple fashion, they don't let you do any EQ whatsoever. So especially with Apple, they don't even give you a global EQ on the phone or Mac device. So you kind of are stuck with what you get. At least with active noise cancellation on or off, it sounds the same. So that's nice to have that kind of consistency. But I find the sub bass to be really strong and impactful while still having a decent mid bass. So it supports a huge variety of genres. And I found these drivers to sound noticeably more clear than even the Sony XM6. So Apple really knocked it out of the park. If you're an Apple user and you don't care about EQ or don't even want to try to understand what that can do, this is still going to sound excellent. And when you factor in how good the ANC performance is, the only real drawback to me was some of the comfort issues, which you'll kind of get a feel for within a return policy. So I'm really happy with the sound quality. Not much you can change here. You can put it in lossless mode, but you're not always going to hear a big difference. And frankly, if you're buying headphones like this, unless you're connecting it to a laptop for travel, I would just stick to Bluetooth mode. And then you have the Bose QuietComfort Ultra, which I'm going to kind of be brief on only because it's a safe tune. It has a little bit better sub bass as the Sony. It's not as detailed sounding as the AirPod Max, but I think it has a higher quality driver and overall sound quality performance than the Sony's. Bose only gives you 3 bands to adjust. It's like bass, mids, and treble, which works well enough because this is tuned good enough out of the box. You don't really need to EQ it as much. I think for a mix of general consumers and audiophiles that might chase a more neutral sound signature, the QuietComfort Ultra is more of that safer tune for everybody. Again, having better sub bass, decent enough mid bass for rock, where it's really just going to come down to personal preference if you like this or not. But I think Bose has kind of balanced the consumerist sound profiles with a more neutral everyday sound quite well. I find that I can get more of the subtle details and better instrument separation with the Bose over the Sony. So there is still a small edge here. And then you have the Noble FoKus Apollo, which is a punchy little guy. If you like to turn it up and you're listening to rock, movies, etc., this thing has an obscene amount of power. And this is the only one here that has a dual driver system. So you still have a dynamic driver like all of these guys, but this is a two-way, and it uses a 14.5mm planar magnetic driver in the center for higher frequencies. Sounds really clear. Instrument separation is excellent. It doesn't have the same sub bass as the Apple AirPod Max, so some people might still feel like the AirPod Max is better in this regard, but the overall tuning to me is still one of the best here. This balances, I think, kind of what Sony was going for, but an even better performer in terms of overall detail retrieval, especially if you start pushing it at the limit. So if you're chasing a more audiophile sound in a closeback and you don't want to do the Apple ecosystem, this is one of the better headphones here for that. It still gives you a 10-band EQ, which is great. Lots of ability to save multiple custom profiles. I will say that the app doesn't work as well on iOS. It doesn't always connect, whereas on Android it always works. So this is a better suited headphone for Android in my opinion. And side note, just in case, because I forgot to say this earlier, this little ANC button has a little bit of a rattle. So even though you don't hear ANC noise to be an issue, that button when you're walking is kind of an odd problem. And then you have the Bathys, which has the clarity and resolution of the AirPod Max with better sub-bass extension than the Noble and overall good mid-bass punch. This is, to me, the most audiophile sounding headphone here, which shouldn't be a surprise given the price range and coming from a company like FoKus. It's an interesting one because when you listen to rock, it's crazy detailed. Listening to metal, the guitars just come in so clear. The bass has good mid-range punch to it for bass guitars and drums, but then you can switch over to rap or hip-hop or EDM, and the deep bass is there too. It's just not crazy strong because everything is relatively linear. So by having this type of presentation, not one particular area comes out as strong, but it's just a fantastic generalist. And if you are chasing a more vocal presentation where you want to hear that stand out in the rest of the mix, you don't want the voices to kind of be buried back behind some instruments, the Bathys is, to me, the best overall sound signature here, at least from my personal preference. I absolutely love the way this sounds. It's a good mix of clarity, good bass, good detail retrieval, and I feel like the vocals and mid-range instruments stand up to the rest of the mix too. So it's really nice there. You don't have as many EQ options, but if you switch to the dynamic preset, that follows more of a Harman curve. That's going to make the voices sound even more clear, and you have a little bit more sub bass. That's a really fun profile to listen to. Then you have the Sennheiser Momentum 4, which pushes, I kept these two for last because they have a similar sound signature. The vocals are more relaxed on the Sennheiser, and the big kicker is this has a ton of sub bass. Like if you just want that deep below 50 hertz bass, this thing just punches way above its price class. And so much so that the limited EQ options you get, which is only a 5-band, you just want to reduce the bass slider a little bit because I think it's actually overpowering the mid-range. And it's more noticeable when you listen to Tool or Metallica or Chevelle. When I was listening to a lot of rock music, I found that the guitars and vocals weren't quite up to the rest of the mix the way I personally would have liked it. Thankfully, if you reduce the bass and increase the vocals a little bit, this is the best bang for your buck for sound quality here. So if you want something that's comfortable enough, if you want something that has great sound quality, good enough ANC, but you don't want to justify spending, $450, $500, then this is still a great option. It's really not bad, to be honest. It's just what you're saving money on is the other specs, but not so much sound quality. And that becomes apparent when you compare it to the Bowers & Wilkins PX8, because it's like just a barely more refined version of the Momentum 4. This isn't twice the performance in terms of sound quality, because it has the same issue of having really strong sub bass and a very relaxed mid-range and low treble. So if you are listen to a lot of rock, just keep in mind guitars are going to sound dark on this, violins, string instruments, they're just more recessed than most of the other headphones here. However, it's a very clean sound. So if you lift those frequencies, which it's hard to do with this because this doesn't give you a mid-range adjustment on the EQ. You can adjust bass and treble. So what I did is I basically just reduced bass a little bit, and then you can play around with your treble adjustment depending on what you're listening to. That made it more enjoyable for me. This was kind of like I don't want to say the biggest letdown here. It's only because it's so much more expensive than some of the others. And I like the build quality, like I said, but with the ANC issue and the tuning being a little bit more, it's not even V-shaped because there's not a lot of mid-bass compared to some of these. It's really a deeper bass and a very relaxed recessed mid-range presentation. If you want a laid-back sound, you're just going on a plane, you want to watch a show and you don't want to have something like too bright or aggressive sounding, it's fine. But I don't think it approaches the neutrality and detail retrieval that you get with the FoKus Bathys or the AirPod Max. Okay, so this is what my voice sounds like using the Sony XM6 microphone. And I'm going to kind of fly through a lot of these headphones here so you can hear how the mics compare to each other. And I also have some city noise I'm going to play in the background. This is kind of at a loud volume, but Sony does a fantastic job at noise cancellation. So I'm hitting play now. So this is what it sounds like with that on in the background. You might hear a little bit of a processing difference. But overall, when I don't talk, you don't hear any of it effectively. The chip is amazing. So I'm going to pause for a moment. And this is what the noise sounds like on this mic now. And now you can hear what that sounds like compared to what you're hearing on this. It's pretty impressive stuff. And this is what my voice sounds like using the Apple AirPods Max, which I don't think sounds as good as the newer Sony XM6, but I just wanted you to hear it. And the background noise rejection isn't as good either. It starts off louder before it finally kicks in, but this is with the city noise playing in the background. So you can hear more of the noise as I'm talking, even compared to the Sony. And if I stop talking, it does quiet down just a little bit. You can still see it's kind of picking it up a little bit. Not as good as the Sony, but you can hear the difference quite clearly. And this is the Bose QuietComfort Ultra microphone, which it sounds a little bit quieter, but I think the tonality and overall performance sounds pretty good. The difference with the QuietComfort Ultra is it's more aggressive at blocking out background noise, especially over the AirPod Max, but at the sacrifice of vocal quality. So now I have the cityscapes playing in the background, and it's doing a good job of getting rid of a lot of that noise, better than the AirPod Max. But I feel like it's a noticeable impact on my vocal quality compared to the Sony, which does a good job of eliminating noise and still keeping my voice rather clear. And this is the Noble FoKus Apollo microphone that's built into the headphone. And I'm going to do this kind of quick because I also have a boom mic, so this is with the background noise. The Apollo does let in more background noise. My voice still sounds pretty good, but it's not going to be blocking as much as some of the counterparts here, which is to be expected considering this is a more audiophile focused headphone. And of course, the party trick with the FoKus Apollo is the boom mic, which as you can clearly hear makes my voice sound a little bit louder, and it also sounds better thanks to the proximity effect because I'm not using a beam-forming mic. The noise rejection's a little bit better with this too, of course, so if I hit play with that noise, you can still hear it, but not as loudly as before. And then you have the FoKus Bathys microphone, which I don't think is as good as some of the ones that we recently heard. It's passable, it's not bad, and the noise rejection's okay. It basically just tables some of that background noise off a little bit. It doesn't eliminate it entirely, so you can still clearly hear it, but my voice doesn't also seem to be as affected as much as a couple other models here either. So it's just an average, pretty reliable performer. And then you have the Sennheiser Momentum 4 microphone, which isn't the best sounding mic in terms of clarity, but it does have good sensitivity, which is nice, and the tonality is not bad, so it sounds pretty good in terms of warmth. It just sounds a little bit more heavily processed. Background noise rejection isn't bad either. You can still hear some of that, but it does a really good job of cutting back a majority of the sound without totally ruining my vocal performance, if you will, so you can still hear what I'm saying. So honestly, a surprising performance considering it's the least expensive one here. And now we have the Bowers & Wilkins PX8 microphone. This is probably one of my favorite sounding microphones here. I think it has a good balance of clarity and warmth, and also the noise rejection performance is quite good as well. You could still hear the noise kind of kick in, but it's really not that loud, and my voice still stands up well and clear above some of that ambient noise I'm competing with. So this was a great performance from the PX8. So that about wraps up this overview. I didn't want to get too far in the weeds again because this video would have been so much longer than it already is, but I hope you found the information you were looking for helpful. There's just so many things to consider when you're getting a Bluetooth headphone because everyone has different preferences. Maybe they just want something that looks good, sounds good enough, but also has excellent noise cancellation, or maybe you're always in a noisy environment and the call performance is really important. There's all these things. Or if you just don't need the ANC to be great, just enough, and you want the best possible sound quality out there, well, there's a lot of good options. Obviously, the AirPod Max is more on the leading side of things for Apple-centric devices, so it's fair to include that. But if you are using it purely for SBC or Android devices, then I would much rather go with a different route. Something like the FoKus Bathys, if Bowers & Wilkins had no defects, I think it has more potential. But frankly, these all have unique selling points at various price points and their own feature set. So I don't really want to declare a clear winner here. Sony and Apple obviously being the leaders here in active noise cancellation, with the others not too far behind, just to be real. So what I particularly use, so I'm not a huge fan of the Sony, to be honest. I don't need that level of noise cancellation. The comfort, build quality, hand feel, all of that. I don't think this is going to hold up as well just from the way the finish is personally, and I want my stuff to look decent. So I've been using the FoKus Bathys for, like I said, almost a year now, and it still looks like new. So I know this is going to hold up well. I could see myself really enjoying the Bose QuietComfort Ultra for planes. I think this is probably my favorite one here if I were to be on an airplane, because that hiss is not really going to be as noticeable, but what will be noticeable is the extended comfort and overall noise cancellation performance, and the sound is still good enough for me to enjoy the content I'm on. If I'm being a more particular audiophile type person, then yeah, I'd probably lean more towards the FoKus. But I will have links in the description below to purchase any of these. Again, it wasn't sponsored by any brand. I bought all of these with my own money for the most part. This is just to help support the channel because I use that to buy more products and create more unbiased and honest reviews for you all. So thank you so much for watching and for making it to the end. Don't forget to like and subscribe so I can see the next one. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.